I'm here with Mark Bownas, who's Partner, EMEA, Leader Sourcing Advisory and CEE Head of Markets at KPMG. Mark, thank you for joining us. You've been part of the G8 panel this afternoon here at Edinburgh at the Shared Services and Outsourcing Week. And there were a couple of questions I wanted to put to you following the debate that you all had earlier. One of the questions that came up, Mark, was whether clients are really maximizing the functionality of their systems. And I believe that the general consensus was no, they could do a lot more. Could you speak about that?
Yeah, clients are finding it difficult, I think, to maximise the functionality of the systems. They make a big investment in IT, a big investment in ERP, and as with most things, the capability of the software provider to add new bells and whistles is not always matched by the training or the ability of the clients and the organisations to use it. It's very similar to how we find ourselves at home. Microsoft will push upgrades to us on a regular basis, but we're still probably only using the functionality that we did when we first got to grips with the software. And I think there's been a lot of talk today about innovation and new technologies. I think where clients and organisations can get more benefit without further IT investment is to use the functionality that's in the systems that they've already purchased, and they're already continuing to pay the license fees for.
Where would that push come from? Do you think the providers ought to be doing a better job of training?
I think that could be part of it. I think again it depends on how the software is sold. So again, most salesmen will understand the functionality and probably explain that at the pitch. But then is the client prepared to invest in the training to get the most out of the software? Because if you look at it, the license fee comes across as being expensive. There's the whole change management program, the process re-engineering, and then often maybe the amount of money that's left in the budget for training is less than it should be. And I think if more money was spent on training, then the return on the investment would be much higher. It's also a case then of continually improving or refreshing the capabilities of the staff that are using the service. Because again, if you imagine, you don't want to be doing 4 or 5 weeks of training up front. Again, in the shared service centres, you may want training on the processes, and at this point, perhaps it is good to focus on a couple of key areas. But maybe after 6 months, after a year, you can come back and say, well, you've mastered the basic functionality, but these are the other things that you could be doing.
That's an important message to push out to the buy side.
I think it is, yes.
Yeah. Mark, I want to ask you about labour arbitrage. Yes. I know there was a lot of discussion about this, and yes. Whether really companies are doing themselves a favour by chasing the dollar, in other words, by looking for today's best opportunities. What do you think?
As you know, I've been based in Budapest for the last 20 years, and Budapest Central Eastern Europe is regarded as a lower cost environment. When companies, certainly the captives, come and speak to me, one of the first questions they ask is how easy will it be to close our shared service centre after 4 or 5 years? Because we believe then the labour arbitrage will have gone, and there won't be a business case for staying in Budapest. Now, strangely enough, no companies really have closed their operations in Budapest. Once they get there, they realise that it's a good place to be. Actually, the reason companies come to Budapest, Central Eastern Europe, or even to India, is as much around availability of labour and the quality of the labour. Yes, there's a cost advantage to be gained as well, but that's often third or fourth on the list of criteria. The other fallacy is the belief that the arbitrage gap will close very quickly. Now again, you look as where we've been in Hungary over the last 20 years, and it started with manufacturing, and people came and did the manufacturing for the same reason, to benefit from the labour arbitrage. And we believe in the long term, then Hungary should be achieving probably 2/3 of the GDP per capita as Austria. 20 years ago, it was 1/3. Now it's half. So in 20 years, the gap has closed by half of what we expect it to be. So you can say it's probably going to take another 20 years before Hungary reaches its full economic potential. And so for that period of time, you've still got labour arbitrage. And I think with a 20-year time, 20 years into the future, that sort of time frame is probably good enough for everybody. So I think people think, the door's going to close after 5 years. All we're interested is in labour arbitrage, and therefore we'll close in Hungary and move to the Ukraine, or we'll move to Romania, or we'll move to the Philippines. In fact, that's almost never happens. What you do see is companies, especially again the captives, who take the basic processes, master them, drive out the efficiencies, and then decide to either transfer those processes further east or outsource them, or both. But then, if they're savvy, they'll replace those roles with more value-added roles and move some other things from the west, from the head office, into the shared service centre in Budapest.
Again, on this labour arbitrage, if a company is talking to you today about setting up potentially in Hungary,
yes,
what would make them have that conversation with you as opposed to one of your colleagues in Asia setting up an operation there?
I think most companies, the reason companies come to Central and Eastern Europe are a good cultural fit, 2 hours flying time away, the same or a similar time zone, availability of foreign language skills other than English, and probably higher level of more complex accounting knowledge.
Even than India, would that be a fair statement?
I think so. Because the culture is more similar. Again, we're talking primarily in Central Eastern Europe about captives, and the people working there have probably got more experience of working in a multinational environment due to the privatisation programs that happened in the early 90s. And this is borne out. Also, if you are moving more complex accounting processes and services to a nearshore or even an offshore, then your accounting group that remains in London or Frankfurt find it easier if they can be there in 2 hours rather than it taking a day to get there. There's a greater comfort factor.
Right, right. And with your clients, what are some of the best things that clients say to you, and what are some of the worst things? In other words, where are the highs and where are the lows?
I think the example of the best thing would be Nick Rose, who's the finance director of Diageo, and he came out in 2001, and he'd been in the finance director role for 2 or 3 years. And Diageo went through one of the reasons for setting up the shared service centre, as they've spoken about, was to embed the merger between Guinness and Grand Met. And they were one of the first to come to Budapest, so this was cutting edge. And he said, before the thing was set up, he said, "This will define my career. If it's successful, my career will flourish, and if it fails, then I will take responsibility." And that was a very powerful message, and that meant there was top-level sponsorship or leadership. Absolutely. And that had an impact throughout the organisation. The worst thing a client says is, "Let's start with the pilot."
Shows very little commitment up front.
Shows very little commitment up front. And then the issue there is, you can say, well, we'll try with Denmark because the risk is low. But you're on a hiding to nothing, because if it fails, then they can say, well, the whole project is at risk. And if it succeeds, the bigger countries can say, well, it doesn't apply to us because Denmark's only 12 people. So the companies that get it right are the ones that move their biggest markets into the shared service centre first.
Right. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.